Hello everyone, my name's Alex Gibson. I'm head of product at Revcast, and today I'm going to show you a full platform demo from how to plan your revenue capacity to set yourself up for success, operate your plan in real time while being aware of any risks and opportunities that may arise, and optimizing your plan to make sure that not only you hit those numbers, but where possible, take a chance to do even better. Let's get started. And here we are in Revcast on our budgets page. And the first thing we're going to do to get started is to create a new budget. We'll give it a name, we'll select the fiscal year for the budget, and we'll also choose a prior fiscal year budget, which will give us a nice starting point. Will have us not starting from scratch. It will pull in the team segments and targets from this budget and give us a nice place to get started. Now, once we have that budget, we can go ahead and click into it and start making some edits and building our plan. Now that we're into the budget, let's walk through a few of the top line KPIs to give you kind of an idea of where we're starting and how we're going to go from here. As you can see, we have our healthcare segment with 2 AE teams, and overall our budget has a revenue target so far of $5 million this year, equal across both of those teams. And you can see if we click revenue target details, we can see some details on both the segment level, the budget level, and the team level of this target. And this will be the case across most of these KPIs. As we just continue across the top, we see our street quota and the breakdown there. In this case, letting us know that the street quota is specifically for sales, and the street quota is generated from the headcount plan that we're building as we go through this process. Continuing, we have our attainment needed, which takes into account that street quota with our ramps and our hires and attrits, and compares that to our revenue target to give us an idea of kind of how we might need to do over the course of the year in order to hit our number. Our pipeline information gives us a notion not only of the targeted pipeline for each of our teams and our segments based on our defined coverage ratio, but also some of the pipeline generation quotas. In other words, the capacity to generate the pipeline along with the capacity to generate those sales, or the street quota that we saw just a minute ago. And we'll talk about, again, as we go through the plan, how we end up building up this information to get to the correct targeting capacity to build an attainable plan for the organization. Our headcount number, fairly self-explanatory, gives a breakdown of the individual headcount, including the employee types or roles such as account executives and sales managers, again across the budget, the segment, and the team. And then finally, last but not least, our cost information. Revcast provides a light cost modeling module that allows you to get a better understanding of the cost of your plan via the cost of your headcount investment so that you can do a little better with the efficiency of your revenue dollars. Now, before we start adding any additional segments and teams, the last thing I want to walk through is this fancy chart that we show you on the page for every single team. And it's scoped to the level at which you're looking. So in this case, we're looking at the budget level. We could also look at it at the segment level, which in this case is the same as the budget level because we only have one segment, or we could view it all the way down at the team level. And what we're looking at here, as we talked about just a moment ago, is an idea of our revenue target and our street quota over time so that we can compare sort of that capacity to generate our revenue to the actual revenue targets that we have. In this specific example, we note that January looks like a pretty rough month for us. In other words, our attainment's going to have to be pretty high because our street quota is relatively low compared to our revenue targets. So it looks like for this team, it gets better over the course of the year. And if we go up to the healthcare segment writ large, things look a little more appropriate. Now also, we mentioned a moment ago that not only do we have street quota capacity and revenue targets, but we also have pipeline capacity and pipeline targets. And this allows us to make sure that we're triangulating all of the variables that we need to build the correct plan. So a moment ago, we walked through the graph and looked at our sales quota and sales targets. We can also do the same for pipeline capacity and pipeline targets. The graph is identical with the information populated from the capacity information to generate pipeline and those pipeline targets that you've set on a per team basis. In this example, our healthcare division AEs are generating their own pipeline. In other words, these account executives on this team, such as Sarah Williams, have both a quota to generate sales and also pipeline capacity. And we'll take a look at editing that just a little bit later. Now we're going to start diving into actually building our budget and doing a bit more interesting things. Back at our budget level, we'll start by adding a new segment and populating that with additional teams, reps, and even some folks who are not just quota-carrying AEs, but BDRs. We'll click the plus icon, we'll add our manufacturing segment, and then we'll go ahead and choose to click and add a few other teams into the manufacturing segment. Now, as we go, this is going to start populating the existing headcount from these teams. In other words, any reps that we already have on these teams with their various quotas and the like will be included on this budget, just like those folks that were on our healthcare teams. If we click into the manufacturing segment, we note immediately we do have just a little bit of work to do. Since these folks were not represented on our prior fiscal year's budget, we need to enter in our revenue targets before we move any further and get started on the rest of our modeling. Let's go through and set a revenue target for our AE Team A and AE Team B on our manufacturing team. If we click into the revenue targets, we're allowed to set these on a month-by-month basis, and through the magic of television, we'll accelerate through that process. Now let's do the same for our AE Team B. With our revenue targets for both AE teams in the manufacturing segment entered and saved, if we go back to that segment level, we now note that a bunch of additional information has been populated for us. The revenue targets now exist, as well as the graphs have been populated with the street quota and revenue targets from those AEs on those teams. Now, we will note one issue. If we click into the AE Team B, all looks pretty good. The revenue targets match the street quotas. In other words, the seasonality of the revenue targets match the street quotas. But if we look at AE Team A, there does appear to be something off. The revenue targets do scale over the year, which is what we expect and is based on historical information, but the street quota, as you can see, does not. It's pretty even over the course of the year. And so it's likely that we need to manage the quotas for this AE Team A, and I'll show you how to do that now. Editing quotas in Revcast is pretty easy. Since we only want to edit the quotas for the account executives on AE Team A in the manufacturing segment, let's hop over to the Teams tab and find that manufacturing AE Team A. Quotas are set on a per fiscal year basis to allow for ultimate flexibility in budgeting and modeling, and in this case we'll note that the $750,000 annual quota has not been set with any seasonality, so it doesn't match the expected targets for that team. We'll go ahead once again through the magic of television and update those quotas and see what happens. Now we've updated our quotas to reflect the seasonality, and the sum still equals the $750,000 annual total quota per rep that we expect. On this page, we'll offer a quick note that here is where you can also add multiple quotas. In this case, if we wanted to, we could add a separate pipeline or sales quota for this AE team. Now, we won't do that because that's not a part of our plan, but we will go ahead and hit save, head back to our budget page, click on AE Team A, and note that now the seasonality of the revenue target and the street quota are more identical, similar to what we had previously for AE Team B. As mentioned previously, not only is it possible to plan and align your revenue target to your street quota, but it's also possible to plan and align your pipeline target with your quota to generate that pipeline. As mentioned before, the healthcare segment AEs are responsible for generating their own pipeline. So each account executive have both a sales street quota and a pipeline generation quota. On the manufacturing segment, this is not the case. The AE teams only have sales quotas as noted by the graph, and if we click into the pipeline target, we note that those AE teams don't have a target nor a quota to generate pipeline. As is common in a lot of organizations, this segment of AEs is supported by a BDR team, folks that will be generating pipeline but not sales for our organization. Clicking on that team gives us the same kind of graph that we saw earlier and also allows us to manipulate our prescribed coverage ratio and monthly pipeline targets, along with getting an idea of what the total pipeline capacity for the team is. With the capacity and targets for both pipeline and revenue entered into our budget, now we can start doing everyone's favorite task, modeling out future hiring and attrition. To start this process, we'll go back to where we just left off, the manufacturing segment. And when we want to model out anything for our plan, it's important to use very good, valid assumptions. And when we're thinking about assumptions, there's really two sources of data we might go to. Number one would be historical information about our organization. In other words, how did we perform in the past? And number two could be benchmark or industry data, which helps us make better decisions for our organization. In this case, as mentioned before, we did not model the manufacturing organization last year, and for the purposes of the demo, let's pretend that we do not have access to historical data. As such, it might be pretty difficult to model, to start with, the attrition for our organization. Luckily, we have some information about the people in the org, for example, their tenure and the role within the organization. In this case, we want to focus on our AE Team A and AE Team B. And so what we might do is ask our handy Revcast assistant, a feature that's able to be enabled for select customers. And we're going to ask just a basic question. What is the average annual attrition of SaaS account executives? A piece of information that would be very valuable for us to know when modeling out the future of our organization. Let's ask the assistant and see what information we can get back. The assistant within Revcast has access not only to data from your organization, but also industry benchmark data, in this case from the Bridge Group, letting us know that the average attrition rate for SaaS account executives last year was about 34% or 1 in 3. We'll be able to use this information as we go forward modeling the attrition for our manufacturing segment. As I X out, scroll down, and open our timeline, here's where we'll actually start to make those attrition assumptions for the year. We can click on our Headcount API to note that there are 8 AEs on this team. In this case, based on the data from the benchmark survey, we will note to expect between 2 and 3 attrits across the year. So we'll go ahead and model those. We'll add 1 for February, and we'll add 1 for March. And we'll note that these expected attrits are immediately impacting not only the street quota, but also the attainment at the top of the page. And in this case, in real time, we're shown that there are some risks to our plan. However, along with these attrits, we'll go ahead and also model backfills or hiring for the losses on this team. We know that our average hiring takes about a month, so in this case, let's expect to backfill these positions in March and April and see what happens to our expectations for the team over the year. As we make those expected backfills, we'll note that the street quota and the attainment both change, and it looks like our plan is still in a pretty good place. Now we'll go ahead and do something similar for the AE Team B. In this case, we'll just push those attrits by a little bit in the year to be a little bit more representative of what we might expect. As you can see in Revcast, it's easy to manipulate your plan. It's easy to create expected hires and attrits to get a better understanding of what your year might look like and build a plan that's sustainable for your organization as a whole. I've gone ahead and finished out modeling attrition for all of the teams across our manufacturing segment. As we saw, AE Team A and AE Team B were done, and I've also added expected hires and attrits to the BDR team. To finish this part of the process, let's pop over to our healthcare segment, and in this case, since we do have access to some historical information about our business, that's what we're going to leverage. Now, we could go straight to the dashboard to look at Revcast's attrition chart, which we'll do in just a second, or once again, because it's a little more fun, we can leverage the built-in assistant, which would give us access to that historical data from our organization. So once again, we'll ask the assistant for help and we'll get back some valuable information. What was the attrition for my AE teams in my healthcare segment last year? As mentioned prior, The assistant has information not only on historical benchmarks, but also data from the Revcast system that's relevant and direct to your organization. In this case, the assistant lets us know that our attrition for the AE teams in the healthcare segment was a staggering 67% in 2023. It also asks, as you'll note, if we'd like to visit the graph on the Revcast dashboard. This not only shows that the assistant can give valuable just-in-time information, but also help you navigate the Revcast application, helping you get where you need to go. Now, I'll be a little more direct and show you how we get to our dashboard. By exiting out, we'll click on our dashboard page, and since we don't have a finalized budget for this fiscal year, we're prompted already for the prior fiscal year information, which is what we're looking for anyway. We'll scroll down to our attrition chart. We'll change this to our actual attrition, and we'll make sure we're just looking at the folks on our healthcare segment. And we'll note over the course of the year, we lost a total of 10 people, when related to our total end of year headcount of 15 gives us that attrition rate of 67%. Always important to validate our assumptions, but it's very nice that we have access to both an assistant and a graph to help us make better decisions as we model out our plan for this fiscal year. Back now on our budget, we'll put this newly found information to good use by accurately representing expected attritions and hires for the healthcare segment. Given the information we found, we will look to do most of these attrits late in the year, in the third and fourth quarter, to be a bit more representative of the data that we found. Our AE Team B is relatively simple, but when we flip over to AE Team A, we'll note that things are just a bit different with this team. If we scroll down in the timeline, we'll note that we have 3 different reps, Clara, Franklin, and Liz, who are all ramping actively, and in this case are not expected to bring in any quota in the first month of the year. This is also reflected up top in our street quota graph, where we can see that January, February, March, and April are just a bit lower than the rest of the year as we actively ramp these reps. Now we want to take this information into account when making our attrition plan for the year as well. We do not expect all of our ramping reps to make it all the way through the year, so let's go ahead and create an attrit for the healthcare team A in April to signify that one of these reps didn't quite make it. Now, as per before, we're going to go ahead and make the backfill to that rep in May, just like we did with the prior teams. As we did with Team B, we'll also go ahead and model out some additional attrits and backfill hires for the third and fourth quarter of the year in an attempt to be as representative as possible. Now, once we put this reasonable plan in place of hires and attrits, we note instantly that there is a challenge for this team. At both the segment level and the team level, we're shown that our attainment is very high. In this case, 87% for AE Team A, which is quite a bit higher than the industry standard of 80%. So not only do you have access to historical benchmarks and information from the assistant and the dashboard, but we also highlight some of that information where important and where it's a risk to your possible plan. So how might we fill this capacity gap on AE Team A? Unfortunately, as we see, it's relatively early in the year, which makes backfills or hiring a bit difficult. Plus, as always, we want to be cost conscious, so we don't just want to necessarily hire new people willy-nilly. Maybe there's another way that we can solve this problem. Just like with hiring and attrits, we're able to model out other future headcount moves within our organization on our plan. What we want to do in this case is make a transfer to the AE team, and we have an opportunity to promote a BDR who has done well in the past and give them a chance to move up in their career. Back on that BDR team, we'll open the timeline, and the individual we want to highlight today is Beatrice Roberts. She's a BDR. We have a lot of attainment information from historicals in the system, and we know that she would be not only right for a promotion, but would be really good at that job. In this case, we'll go ahead and move her over in February to the AE Team A team in the healthcare segment. We'll signify that we're moving her to an AE position, and we also have an opportunity to choose the ramp month, or the starting ramp month for Beatrice. Since she's been with the organization for a while, we're not going to start her with 0 ramp like we did for those other folks. We're going to let her start in the 3rd month of ramp. So she's going to be contributing to our revenue a bit sooner than a net new hire. This will not only get us faster value, but also allow us to save a bit of cost, as we're cutting a bit of time that Beatrice takes to get up and running within the organization. Back on that healthcare Team A, we'll note that that attainment needed has dropped now to a more manageable 76%. Now, of course, we may still want to be cognizant of that pipeline generation from our BDR team, and we can always go back and look visually at the quotas across the year, as well as click into the pipeline KPI to note that currently there are no issues expected within this plan. So we've done a really good job to not only model out our hiring and attrition, but also fill an attainment gap by moving someone and giving them a chance to be promoted within the organization. To round out our budgeting process, the very last thing we want to do is just give an eye toward our cost. We talked about that top line KPI and how it's broken down earlier, but I very briefly want to show you how easy it is in Revcast to update the cost of your headcount. In this case, for example, let's say we've decided that because of the positive performance of our BDR team, we want to give them a slight bump in salary this year. Of course, this compensation modeling is done outside of Revcast, but the cost should be and will be considered within your plan. If we look at the manufacturing segment and scroll down to the bottom, we'll note that we have a projected revenue, a projected cost, and a projected cost to revenue ratio. In this case, the total cost for this segment is $4.48 million this year. Now, as mentioned, we do want to update that compensation for our BDRs on the team. So let's go ahead to our employees page, click on the gear icon for employee types, find the BDRs, and we'll note that both their 2023 and 2024 base salary is $18,000. There's also a variable comp and overhead to be fully representative of the cost of that headcount. Let's go ahead and update the base salary from $18,000 to $28,000, a decent amount of money for 2024, which will also immediately be reflected back in our budget. Back to the manufacturing segment, that $4.48 million expected cost is now $4.55. If we scroll down, we'll note that the cost to revenue ratio hasn't changed very much over the course of the year, so this cost isn't super likely to influence overall the efficiency of our revenue dollar, but it's nice to be able to understand the expectations over time and how we're spending our money. Now, once we're feeling good about our budget, we've modeled out our attrition and our hires, we've made some team moves, we've updated our costs and our targets, the very last thing for us to do is to finalize. And what this will do is lock our budget into place and create all of these expected actions or expected hires and attrits for us to make over the course of the year. Revcast will not only keep us honest, but track the status of these items and show us any risks or opportunities to our plan as we go. Once confirmed, the budget is finalized and we're ready to kick off the hard work, which is managing and executing on our plan. Cross-dissolve means that we've gone from planning our budget to executing our plan on a daily basis. As we've seen prior, the dashboard gives us useful charts and graphs to help us understand not only historical information about our business, but also the current status. The Insights page, where we are now, highlights things that we really need to know. And in this case, we can see, unfortunately, that things are already going a bit awry, but maybe not for the reasons that we would think. If we scroll down on our weekly sales capacity forecast, we can see that our net new revenue quarter to date, which since we're in the first quarter is also year to date, is about 99% on target. In other words, we're actually doing pretty well when it comes to revenue. Unfortunately, it does look like the future might not be as bright and sunny. And in the risks and opportunities section, we go through a few reasons why that might be the case. In no particular order, Revcast provides risks and opportunities around ramp, street quota, hiring, and headcount, not only for this quarter, but for future quarters as well. The idea being that you're able to understand things about your business when there's still time to do something about it. In this case, we'll note that not only do we have a bit of expected late hiring as we had to push back an expected hire from that plan, but, and maybe most impactful, our future pipeline street quota, the quota to generate pipeline for next quarter, is only 59% of what we planned it to be. That provides a pretty big risk not only to our pipeline generation, but ultimately to our overall revenue. Now, luckily for us, things aren't all bad. Revcast also show us some positives. In this case, it looks like AEs are ramping a bit faster than we expected. So they're providing a bit more revenue to our plan than otherwise anticipated. And again, going back to that weekly sales capacity forecast, we'll note this information is reflected within the revenue line, telling us that our ramping reps have actually won a bit more business than we anticipate. So this information is helpful in context for making decisions about what we're going to do now and also what we're going to do in the future. Now, given all this read, and again for the purposes of the demo, I think it's best that we enter what we might call a replan, or let's actually do a scenario plan to see what our options might be to alleviate some of these risks and do better going forward. Now here we are back at the start. On our budgets page, we have our fiscal year 24 V1 draft that we finalized, and it was pretty aptly named given that, well, now we're in a position to have to redo it. And that's usually the truth. The moment you finalize a plan is the moment that you start needing to execute on it, is the moment that it starts being wrong. And so in Revcast, we try to make replanning or scenario planning super easy so that you can work on your business while getting to the right decisions for the future. Now, as mentioned, there's a few challenges that we saw on our insights page that we want to alleviate. And instead of starting from scratch, let's go ahead and just build a scenario directly from this version of the budget so that we can get things right. And once again, I'm going to go ahead and ask our friendly assistant if they can help. To get started with our scenario, the first thing we need to do is create the new budget. And as mentioned, we want to create a copy from the existing budget that we're using. Now, we could dig around in the support center in the interface to identify how to copy the budget, or once again, we could ask our assistant. Create a copy of the FY24 V1 draft budget for me. Our assistant will take the command and ask us to confirm if we'd like to go ahead and create that copy of the budget, to which we'll say, yes, please. Once confirmed, the assistant helps us out by creating the budget. We can close out and navigate directly to it. I won't make you sit through editing and updating every single team for which there were changes, but as we saw on the risks and opportunities page, the BDR team in our manufacturing segment has been beset with some issues. We'll note that, of course, Beatrice moved over and her quota to generate pipeline was taken away from the team, but also Jake and Neil, unfortunately for us, fortunately for them, not only found success as fully ramped BDRs within our organization, but also found each other and let us know earlier this month that they were going to be taking a nice 4-month leave of absence together to celebrate their nuptials. You may think that's crazy, but I've seen it happen. Twice. Unfortunately, what this means is that there's a massive gap in our pipeline quota, or our capacity to generate pipeline, in the second quarter of this year. As noted by the risk on our insights page, we are only at about 59% of our pipeline quota capacity, or pipeline quota on the street, for April, May, and June. So the rest of the year might be a bit tough. As we know, today's pipeline is tomorrow's revenue. And unfortunately, tomorrow's revenue is what the board of directors and the CRO are often asking us about. So in this case, what are we going to do? Now, because we've already had a couple of team moves, right? We don't have as many people on the team anymore. I'm guessing we can probably go ahead and remove this April attrit to make our numbers immediately look better. Another thing we can do, and of course this is generally a negotiation with finance, specifically around our cost model, is we could accelerate one of those future hires. Remember, we have a hire here in May and a hire here in August, so let's go ahead and just change this May hire to March. Again, being a little creative with our budgeting and our hiring pipeline to try to see if we can fill this gap left by the individuals who are leaving us behind for a few months. Now again, immediately we'll note that the cost and pipeline numbers change, but it does look, based on all of this information and the graphs at hand, that these slight changes to our budget are going to put us in a much better position to succeed, not just from generating pipeline from the manufacturing team, but also sales attainment for the healthcare team and our overall plan. Finally, once we're ready and feeling good about this iteration of the plan, we can once again hit our Finalize button, create all of our expected hires and terminations, and have a budget ready to go to execute upon and get really good insights, risks, and opportunities. Now, the prior budget that we created will always remain so that we can inevitably look back and see how the updated plan compared against what we originally expected. That was a platform demo of Revcast. If you have any questions, would like to see an instance of our product with your data in it, or would like to provide any feedback on how we're doing and how we might do better, please check us out at revcast.com.